Hey everyone. I never thought I'd find myself posting here, but here I am. I'm Shane, a 38-year-old software developer in aerospace. Life's been pretty good, or so I thought. I've got a beautiful wife, Kay, and 2 amazing kids. We were on what was supposed to be a dream family vacation in Southern California. You know, beaches, sun, relaxation. It was everything we needed after a hectic few months. But now, I feel like my world is about to implode. It started small, Kay glued to her phone. More than usual, I mean. She's always been active on social media, but this was different. She'd smile at her screen, then quickly lock it when I walked by. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe she was planning a surprise for me or scrolling through funny TikToks. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband. One afternoon, I took the kids to the pool. Kay said she needed some me time to relax in the room. Fine, no big deal. While we were swimming, I met this guy Dan. Friendly dude, mid-40s, staying a few rooms down from us. He struck up a conversation, asking about my family. Turns out, he works at the same company as Kay. Small world, right? Except something about him didn't sit well with me. He knew a little too much about Kay, her role, her recent projects. Stuff I didn't think a casual coworker would know. When I mentioned her, his smile tightened. It was subtle, but I noticed. I brushed it off, thinking I was reading too much into things. That night, after we put the kids to bed, I stepped out onto the balcony to get some fresh air. The pool area was quiet, just the glow of the lights reflecting off the water. That's when I saw them, Kay and Dan. At first, I thought it was just a friendly chat. But then she leaned in, and before I could process it, they kissed. My heart stopped. I told myself I must have seen it wrong. Maybe it was a trick of the light or my imagination running wild. But no. They kissed again, and then they walked off together, heading toward the far side of the resort. I stood there frozen, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. The rest of the night was a blur. I couldn't confront her, not yet. I needed to think, figure out what to do. Kay came back to the room an hour later, smelling faintly of something unfamiliar. When I asked where she'd been, she said, just grabbed a drink at the bar. Needed to unwind. She said it so casually, like nothing had happened. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with him by the pool. I've got so many questions and no idea where to start. Should I confront her? Pretend I didn't see it? Am I overreacting? The next morning, I tried to act normal. Kay seemed fine, like nothing was weighing on her. She joked with the kids over breakfast, took a selfie of all of us, and posted it with some sappy caption about family memories. I sat there, watching her like she was a stranger. I kept replaying the night in my head. The way she kissed Dan, the ease with which she lied to me later. Was I imagining it? Overreacting? I didn't want to accuse her and blow everything up without proof. So, I decided to observe. That day, we went to the beach. Kay spent half the time on her phone, her fingers flying across the screen while the kids and I played in the waves. When I asked who she was texting, she said, "Oh, just Rebecca. She's planning a girls' trip and wanted my input." Her answer was so smooth, so quick. At one point, her phone buzzed, and she turned the screen away before I could see it. It was subtle, but it felt deliberate. I didn't press her. Not yet. That night, I excused myself after dinner, saying I needed to grab something from the car. In reality, I went back to the room and did something I never thought I'd do. I checked her phone. It was locked, of course, but I knew her passcode. Her texts with Rebecca were there, just like she said. But then I saw a message thread with Dan. It wasn't explicit, just casual conversations about work, jokes about the vacation, and one that made my stomach twist. Dan, last night was nice. Thanks for trusting me. Kay, of course. You're the only one who gets it. What did that even mean? Last night was nice? What did he mean by that? I didn't have time to dig deeper because I heard her voice outside the door. I barely had time to put the phone back before she walked in, smiling like nothing was wrong. I couldn't look at her. My mind was racing. I wanted to confront her right there, but the kids were in the other room. I had to play it cool. Later that night, after everyone was asleep, I sat on the balcony, nursing a drink and staring out at the ocean. I felt like I was coming undone. What was she doing with Dan? Was this just emotional, or was it physical? And why did she think he gets it? I needed answers, but I couldn't shake the fear that I might not be ready to hear them. The morning started off tense, at least for me. Kay, on the other hand, was all smiles and sunshine. She even suggested we rent bikes and ride along the boardwalk, something she'd been talking about doing for weeks. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe she was genuinely oblivious to how much I'd seen through her facade. I agreed, hoping it would give me a chance to clear my head. But as we rode, my thoughts were everywhere except on the bike path. Kay laughed with the kids, took photos, and even held my hand briefly when we stopped for ice cream. From the outside, we probably looked like the perfect family. Inside, I felt like I was holding a grenade with the pin already pulled. After lunch, Kay said she had a headache and wanted to rest in the room while I took the kids to a nearby arcade. Fine by me. It gave me time to think, and to keep an eye on her. Before heading to the arcade, I lingered in the lobby, watching the elevators. About 10 minutes later, I saw Dan walk through, casually heading toward the same elevator bank. My stomach dropped. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I grabbed the kids and made a show of being out for a couple of hours. When we got back to the hotel, I told them to head to the room while I stopped by the bar to grab a drink. Really, I was hoping to spot Dan or Kay, or both. Sure enough, I saw Dan sitting at the bar, looking relaxed, chatting with the bartender. Kay wasn't with him. I watched for a while before heading back upstairs. When I opened the door, Kay was lying on the bed, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. Feeling better? I asked, trying to sound casual. Yeah, much better. Thanks for letting me rest, she said with a smile. That's when I noticed it again, that faint, unfamiliar scent. Not her usual perfume, not the lotion she always uses. It was subtle, but it didn't belong to her. I leaned in to kiss her forehead, partly to check if the scent was stronger up close. It was. Something earthy, almost woody, like cologne. What's that smell? I asked, feigning curiosity. She looked confused for half a second before saying, "Oh, I sprayed some of that room freshener they leave in the bathroom. It's kind of strong, isn't it?" I nodded, not wanting to push it. But I didn't believe her. Later that night, while Kay was putting the kids to bed, I saw an opportunity to check her phone again. This time, there were new messages from Dan. Dan, next time we need more time. Kay agreed. Thanks for being patient. You're amazing. My hands shook as I read those words. I knew what they meant, even if I didn't want to admit it to myself. When Kay came out of the kids' room, I couldn't even look at her. She asked if I was okay, and I mumbled something about being tired. I wasn't just tired. I was unraveling. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those messages, replayed the kiss I saw by the pool. My gut was telling me what I didn't want to accept. Something was happening between Kay and Dan. The next morning, I decided to test the waters. As we were getting ready to head out, I casually brought up Dan. "Hey, isn't that guy from your work here? What a coincidence, right?" I said, watching her reaction closely. Kay froze for a split second. It was quick, but I caught it. Then she smiled and said, "Oh, you mean Dan? Yeah, funny, isn't it? I ran into him yesterday at the bar when I went to get a drink." Small world. I nodded, pretending to buy it. But her tone was too breezy, too rehearsed. "Seems like a good guy," I added, fishing. She shrugged. "Yeah, he's nice. We don't work closely, but he's always been friendly." Friendly. That word hit me harder than it should have. Throughout the day, I kept an eye on her. She was more attentive than usual, laughing at my jokes, holding my hand, even stealing a kiss or two. It felt off, like she was trying too hard. By the time evening rolled around, I was more determined than ever to figure out the truth. While Kay was showering, I grabbed her phone again. The thread with Dan had new messages. Dan, tonight. Kay, can't. He's been paying more attention. I think he suspects something. My heart dropped. She knew I was watching, and yet she was still keeping this secret. I wanted to smash her phone right then and there, but I forced myself to stay calm. When she came out of the bathroom, towel drying her hair, I asked, "So, what's the plan for tonight? Should we do something as a family?" Kay hesitated, just for a moment before saying, "Actually, I was thinking of heading to the spa for a bit. You know, just to unwind." It's been a long day. Sure, I said, forcing a smile. You deserve it. She left an hour later, and I waited exactly 5 minutes before following her. At the spa, I didn't see her. I checked the bar, the pool area, nothing. Finally, I walked to the back of the resort, where the beach paths were darker and quieter. And that's when I saw them. Kay and Dan, sitting on a bench under a dim light, their heads close together. It wasn't as bold as the kiss I'd seen before, but the intimacy was undeniable. I didn't confront them. Not yet. I stood there in the shadows, watching, my heart pounding in my chest. They talked for a while, and then he leaned in, whispering something in her ear. She laughed, a soft, private laugh I hadn't heard in years. I turned and walked away before I could see anything else. When Kay got back to the room later that night, I was pretending to watch TV, but my mind was racing. She walked in, smiling like nothing was wrong, holding a small bag from the resort spa. "How was your night?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Oh, it was great. The massage was exactly what I needed," she said, sitting on the bed and rummaging through her bag. I stared at her, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. She lied so effortlessly, like it was second nature. "Good to hear," I said, forcing a smile. "You were gone a while. Must have been relaxing." She nodded, not looking at me. "Yeah, I stayed in the lounge for a bit after. Just needed some time to myself. I couldn't take it anymore." "That's funny," I said, my voice sharper now. "Because I saw you. With Dan." Her head snapped up, eyes wide. "What? What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Kay. I saw you too. Sitting together, laughing, looking cozy," I said, my hands gripping the edge of the chair to keep from losing it. She opened her mouth to speak but hesitated, like she was scrambling for a story. "He just happened to be there. We talked for a bit, that's all." "You're overreacting." "Overreacting," I said, standing up. "I've seen the way you two act around each other. The messages. The kiss by the pool. Don't lie to me, Kay." Her face turned pale, and for a moment, I thought she was going to come clean. But instead, she crossed her arms and said, "You're being ridiculous. He's a coworker, Shane. We are friends. That's it." I laughed bitterly. Friends? Do friends send messages like, "Last night was nice," or "Next time, we need more time"? Do friends sneak off to meet in the middle of the night? Her jaw tightened, and she looked away. "I don't know what you think you saw, but you're wrong. Nothing happened. You're paranoid." I stared at her, trying to figure out if she actually believed the lies she was spewing. "Paranoid? Fine. Let's settle this. Show me your phone." She froze, clutching the bag from the spa like it was her lifeline. "No," she said finally, her voice cold. "I'm not doing this. I don't have to prove anything to you." That was it, the confirmation I needed. She was hiding something, and she wasn't even trying to deny it anymore. "Then I guess we're done talking," I said, heading to the balcony. "But let me be clear, Kay. I'm not stupid. I know something's going on, and I will find out the truth." I left her sitting there, glaring at me, while I tried to calm down. The air outside was warm, but I felt like I was freezing from the inside out. The next morning was tense. Kay acted like nothing had happened, focusing all her energy on the kids. She laughed at their jokes, helped them pack their bags for another beach day, and didn't so much as glance in my direction. I decided to let her think I'd dropped it, for now. But my mind was spinning. Her refusal to show me her phone, the lies, the messages, I couldn't ignore it anymore. We spent the day at the beach. I played with the kids while Kay lounged on a chair, scrolling through her phone. Every so often, I caught her sneaking glances at me, like she was trying to gauge my mood. By the time we got back to the hotel, I was exhausted, but I wasn't giving up. I needed more answers. After dinner, I told Kay I was going to take a walk to clear my head. She nodded, barely looking up from her phone. I walked straight to the lobby and asked the front desk if I could speak with security. I needed to know if the resort had cameras near the pool or beach paths. If they could provide footage, I'd have the proof I needed. The security manager, a polite older man named Greg, was helpful. "We do have cameras in some areas, but the coverage isn't comprehensive," he said. "Could you check if there's any footage from last night? Around 9:30 near the beach paths?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Greg frowned but nodded. "I'll see what we have. Give me a few minutes." I waited in the lobby, my heart pounding. When Greg returned, he had a serious expression. "We do have footage from that time," he said. "There's a camera near the beach paths. It's not very clear, but I can show you what we've got." He led me to a small office and pulled up the footage. The screen showed a grainy black and white image of the path. I could see two figures sitting on a bench, Kay and Dan. The footage didn't capture sound, but their body language was unmistakable. She leaned toward him, her hand brushing his arm. He put an arm around her shoulders briefly before pulling back. I felt sick watching it. There it was, the proof I'd been dreading. "Can I get a copy of this?" I asked Greg, my voice hoarse. He hesitated. "I can't officially release it to guests, but," he paused, then handed me a flash drive. "Let's just say I didn't see anything." I thanked him and walked back to the room, the drive burning a hole in my pocket. When I got back, Kay was already in bed, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up when I walked in but didn't say anything. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I sat on the balcony again, staring at the waves. I had the evidence now, but what was I supposed to do with it? The next morning, Kay woke up acting like everything was fine, but I couldn't hold it in anymore. I decided it was time to put the cards on the table. We had just finished breakfast in the room when the kids asked to go to the arcade again. I saw my opening. "You two go ahead," I told them, smiling. "Your mom and I need to talk about some plans for today. I'll meet you there in a bit." Kay glanced at me, her smile faltering. She must have sensed something was coming, but she didn't argue. Once the kids were gone, I shut the door and turned to her. "We need to talk. And this time, I want the truth." "Shane," she sighed, putting down her coffee, "I told you there's nothing going on. Why can't you just drop it?" "Because I know you're lying," I said, my voice steady. "And I have proof." Her face paled, but she quickly recovered, crossing her arms defensively. "Proof of what? That I had a drink with a coworker? You're being ridiculous." I pulled out the flash drive Greg had given me and held it up. "This is security footage from the resort. It shows you and Dan on the beach path last night. So don't sit there and tell me it was just a drink at the bar." Her eyes widened for a split second before narrowing. "You went to security? Are you serious, Shane? That's insane." "What's insane?" I shot back. "Is you sneaking around with another man while pretending everything's fine. I saw the way you two were sitting, the way he touched you. And that's not even counting the messages I've seen." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't decide what to say. Finally, she went with denial. "You're twisting everything. We talked, that's it. He's been going through a tough time, and I was just being a friend. You're making something out of nothing." I felt a sharp pang of anger. "A friend? You're telling me he needed a midnight therapy session on the beach? Spare me, Kay." Her expression hardened. "You know what, Shane? This is exactly why I didn't want to tell you. You always overreact. You're controlling, always looking for problems where there aren't any." That cut deep, but I wasn't letting her turn this around on me. "Don't you dare try to blame this on me. I didn't ask you to lie to me, to sneak around. You did that all on your own." For a moment, she didn't respond, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then she said, "Fine. Believe what you want. But I know the truth, and I'm done defending myself." She stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I sat down heavily on the bed, my head in my hands. She hadn't admitted to anything, but her reaction said it all. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It wasn't nothing. And now I had to figure out what came next. After Kay stormed out, I sat there for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. My mind kept going back to her reaction, the deflection, the denial, the anger. She hadn't admitted anything outright, but she hadn't denied it convincingly either. When I finally went to meet the kids at the arcade, I tried to act normal. They were laughing and running from one game to the next, completely oblivious to the storm brewing between their parents. I envied their innocence. Kay showed up about an hour later, her expression carefully neutral. She kissed the kids on the tops of their heads and avoided looking at me. "How's it going?" she asked casually, as if nothing had happened. "Fine," I said shortly, focusing on the kids. The tension between us was impossible to ignore, and I could tell the kids were starting to pick up on it. My oldest, Olivia, tugged on my sleeve at one point and asked, "Dad, are you and Mom mad at each other?" "No, sweetheart," I lied, forcing a smile. Everything's fine. Go play with your brother. But things weren't fine. Not even close. Back in the room that evening, Kay finally broke the silence. "We can't keep this up in front of the kids," she said quietly. I turned to her, surprised. "So you're ready to talk?" She hesitated. "I don't want to fight, Shane. I just want to enjoy the rest of the trip. For the kids' sake." I almost laughed. "For the kids' sake? You think we can just sweep this under the rug and pretend nothing's happening?" Her jaw tightened. "What do you want me to say, Shane? That I've made mistakes? Fine, I'll say it. But it doesn't mean what you think it does." My chest tightened. "What does that even mean?" She sighed, like she was annoyed with me for not understanding. "Dan and I are just friends. Have we gotten close?" "Yes. But it's because I needed someone to talk to, someone who wasn't you. You're always so busy with work or the kids, and I feel like I don't exist half the time." Her words hit me like a slap. I didn't know whether to feel guilty or furious. "So you turned to him instead of talking to me? Do you hear how that sounds, Kay?" She shrugged, her voice hard. "Maybe if you paid more attention, I wouldn't have felt the need." I stared at her, disbelief and anger bubbling up. "You're blaming me for this? You're the one sneaking around, lying to my face, and I'm the problem." Kay didn't respond. She just grabbed her phone and walked out onto the balcony, leaving me standing there alone. I sat down, my mind spinning. This wasn't just about her and Dan. It was about us, about everything we'd let slide, all the cracks we'd ignored. And now, those cracks were starting to swallow us whole. The rest of the night passed in strained silence. Kay stayed on the balcony, scrolling on her phone or staring out at the ocean. I stayed inside, pretending to read but too distracted to focus on anything. We barely said a word to each other when we finally went to bed. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying her words over and over in my head. She felt ignored? Invisible? How had I missed that? But even if I had failed her somehow, it didn't justify what she was doing with Dan. And it didn't make her lies any easier to swallow. The next morning, I woke up early and decided to take a walk along the beach. The fresh air helped clear my head a little, but I still didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to confront Dan, to demand answers. Another part of me wanted to pack up and leave, take the kids home and sort this out later. By the time I got back to the room, Kay was awake, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. She looked up when I walked in, her expression guarded. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. We stood there for a moment, the silence stretching between us. Finally, she spoke. "Look, Shane, I know you're upset. And I get it. But can we just put this aside for now? At least for the kids? They don't deserve to have their vacation ruined because we can't get along." I clenched my jaw, wanting to argue, but she had a point. The kids didn't need to be caught in the middle of this. "Fine," I said finally. "But this conversation isn't over. When we get home, we're dealing with this. All of it." She nodded, relief flashing across her face. "Thank you." The rest of the day felt like walking on eggshells. We went to a local amusement park, trying to act like everything was fine. Kay laughed a little too loudly at the kids' jokes, and I found myself forcing smiles for the sake of appearances. But underneath it all, the tension was unbearable. Every time Kay glanced at her phone, I felt my stomach twist. Every time she smiled, I wondered if she was thinking about him. That night, after the kids were asleep, Kay and I sat on opposite sides of the room. She was scrolling on her phone again, and I was pretending to watch TV. "I want to see your phone," I said suddenly, my voice cutting through the quiet. She looked up, startled. "What?" "You heard me," I said, my tone firm. "If you have nothing to hide, let me see your phone." She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the device. "Why can't you just trust me, Shane? I told you there's nothing going on." "Because trust isn't something you demand, Kay. It's something you earn. And right now, you're not exactly earning it." Her face hardened, but she didn't argue. Instead, she stood up, grabbed her phone, and walked into the bathroom, slamming the door behind her. I sat there, my hands clenched into fists, knowing exactly what she was doing, erasing whatever she didn't want me to see. When she came out a few minutes later, she tossed the phone onto the table in front of me. "There," she said coldly. "Happy now?" I picked it up, scrolling through her messages, her call log, her social media. Everything looked clean. Too clean. Convenient, I muttered, tossing the phone back onto the table. Kay crossed her arms, glaring at me. I don't know what you want from me, Shane. You've already made up your mind. No matter what I say, you're going to believe the worst. I stood up, my voice rising. You're right, Kay. I have made up my mind, because I'm not stupid. I've seen the messages, the footage. You can delete all you want, but it doesn't erase the truth. She didn't respond. She just grabbed her pillow and walked out of the room, slamming the door to the kids' room behind her. I sat back down, my heart pounding. This truce, if you could even call it that, was as shaky as they come. And I had no idea how much longer I could keep up the act. The next morning, Kay acted like nothing had happened, but I could see the strain behind her forced smiles. She made pancakes for the kids, joked about the day's plans, and completely ignored me. The kids, thankfully, seemed oblivious to the tension between us. After breakfast, we decided to take a boat tour along the coast. The kids were excited, and I did my best to focus on them instead of the knot tightening in my chest every time Kay and I exchanged glances. On the boat, Kay was quieter than usual. She spent most of the ride gazing out at the water, her phone tucked away for once. I wanted to believe it was guilt, but I couldn't be sure. When we got back to the hotel, the kids wanted to swim in the pool. Kay offered to take them while I relaxed, though we both knew I needed space. The moment they left, I grabbed her phone from where she'd left it charging. She'd already deleted most of the evidence, but I wasn't giving up that easily. I checked her email, her social media apps, even her notes. And then I found it. In her recently deleted messages, there was a single unsent draft. Dan, I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. I feel trapped. I hate lying to him, but I hate the idea of losing you more. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. She hadn't even sent it, but it was enough to confirm everything I'd feared. I heard the door open and quickly put the phone back. Kay walked in, her hair damp from the pool, the kids chattering behind her. She gave me a tight smile and said, "We're going to shower and get cleaned up before dinner. You coming?" "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll be there in a bit." As soon as they were out of earshot, I sat down, my head in my hands. The draft wasn't just a confession. It was proof that this wasn't just some casual flirtation. She felt something for him. Enough to lie to me, to risk everything we'd built. By the time dinner rolled around, I couldn't even look at her. She tried to make small talk, but I barely responded. The kids must have noticed, because Olivia asked, "Are you okay, Dad? You're really quiet." "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired." Kay shot me a look, but didn't say anything. That night, after the kids were asleep, Kay cornered me in the room. "What's going on with you?" she asked, her voice low but sharp. "You've been acting weird all day." I laughed bitterly. "Me? I've been acting weird." "Yes, you," she snapped. "You're distant, moody." I cut her off. "Maybe because I'm married to someone who's keeping secrets. Who's lying to my face every chance she gets." Her face flushed with anger. "I've told you 100 times, Shane. There's nothing going on. I don't know what you want from me." "I found the draft, Kay," I said, my voice cold. "The one you wrote to Dan. I hate lying to him. Remember that." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked like she might break. But then she straightened, her face hardening. "You went through my phone again? Are you serious?" "You can be mad at me all you want," I said, standing my ground. "But that doesn't change the fact that you wrote it." She crossed her arms, her voice shaking. "I didn't send it, Shane. I didn't send it because I knew it was wrong. I was venting, that's all." "Venting," I repeated, shaking my head. "Do you hear yourself? You're venting to the guy you've been sneaking around with. The guy you kissed by the pool." "I told you nothing happened," she yelled, her voice cracking. "Why can't you just believe me?" "Because you've given me no reason to." I shouted back. "You're lying, Kay. To me, to the kids, to yourself. And I'm done pretending I don't see it." She stared at me, her eyes filling with tears, but I didn't feel sorry for her. "Not this time. You've broken my trust, Kay," I said, my voice quieter now. "And I don't know if we can come back from this." She didn't respond. She just turned and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the weight of everything she'd refused to say. Kay spent the night in the kids' room. I didn't bother going after her. What was the point? Every conversation turned into a cycle of denial, deflection, and half-truths. I was exhausted. The next morning, she acted like nothing was wrong again. She made breakfast, joked with the kids, and avoided eye contact with me. I played along for the kids' sake, but inside, I was seething. Around mid-morning, I decided to step out for some air. Kay didn't ask where I was going, which told me all I needed to know about where we stood. I walked aimlessly along the boardwalk, thinking about everything. I had given her every chance to come clean, to tell the truth, and she'd chosen to lie, to protect whatever fantasy she was building with Dan. Then, as if the universe was taunting me, I saw him. Dan, sitting at a cafe near the beach, sipping coffee like he didn't have a care in the world. Before I knew what I was doing, I walked straight up to him. "Dan," I said, my voice cold and flat. He looked up, his face going pale when he recognized me. "Shane," he said, trying to muster a casual smile. "Hey man. What's up?" I leaned in close, lowering my voice. "We need to talk. Now." He looked around, clearly uncomfortable, but he didn't argue. He gestured to the seat across from him, and I sat down. "You want to tell me what's going on with my wife?" I asked, my eyes boring into his. Dan shifted uncomfortably, running a hand through his hair. "Look Shane, I don't know what you think is happening, but—" "Don't," I snapped, cutting him off. "Don't sit here and insult my intelligence. I've seen the messages. I've seen the two of you together. So don't waste my time with lies." He stared at me for a long moment, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Finally, he sighed. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay, look. Kay and we've gotten close. But it's not what you think. Not what I think." I said, my voice rising. "You've been sneaking around with my wife, and you expect me to believe it's innocent?" "She's unhappy, Shane," he said, his voice desperate. "She feels like you don't see her anymore. Like you don't care. I didn't mean for it to happen, but we connected." "You connected," I repeated, the words dripping with sarcasm. "You mean you decided it was okay to go after another man's wife?" "I didn't go after her," Dan said, his tone defensive. "It just happened." I leaned forward, my voice low and dangerous. "Let me be very clear, Dan. You've already crossed the line. But if you so much as look at her again, I will make sure you regret it. Do you understand me?" Dan swallowed hard and nodded. Yeah, I get it." I stood up, my fists clenched at my sides. "Stay away from my family," I said, before turning and walking away. Back at the hotel, Kay was sitting on the balcony, scrolling through her phone. She looked up when I walked in, her face tense. "Where were you?" she asked. "Talking to Dan," I said bluntly, watching her reaction. Her face drained of color. "What?" "You heard me," I said. "I told him to stay away from you. From us." And he agreed. Kay stood up, her hands trembling. "You had no right." "I had every right," I said, cutting her off. "You made this mess, Kay. You let him into our marriage. Now I'm cleaning it up." She didn't respond, but the look in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't over. Kay didn't say much after I told her about my conversation with Dan. She sat back down, her face a mix of anger and fear, but she didn't argue. I think she realized I wasn't backing down anymore. The kids were oblivious to the tension as we spent the rest of the day out. I went through the motions, but my head was somewhere else. Every glance Kay gave me felt loaded, every word she spoke felt hollow. That evening, as the kids watched a movie, Kay finally spoke up. "Shane," she said quietly, pulling me aside. "I didn't want it to get to this point. I didn't mean to hurt you." I stared at her, trying to find sincerity in her words. "Then why, Kay? Why lie? Why sneak around?" She hesitated, her eyes welling up. "I don't know. I was lonely, and he listened. But it didn't mean anything. I swear." I let out a bitter laugh. "Didn't mean anything? You risked our family for something that didn't mean anything." Her silence was deafening. I didn't say anything more. I just walked out to the balcony, leaving her alone with her regret. The rest of the trip passed in strained silence. Kay avoided confrontation, sticking close to the kids and keeping her phone out of sight. I didn't press her anymore. I'd said everything I needed to say. The drive back home was unbearable. The kids, thankfully, were distracted with their tablets and snacks, but the silence between Kay and me was heavy. Every so often, I'd catch her glancing at me, her expression unreadable. When we finally pulled into the driveway, Kay spoke softly, almost hesitantly. "We need to talk. About everything." I nodded, my jaw tight. "Yeah, we do." The kids ran inside, excited to be back, while Kay and I lingered by the car. For a moment, neither of us said anything. "Let's put the kids to bed first," I said finally, my voice flat. She nodded, and we both went inside, preparing for the conversation we could no longer avoid. Once the kids were asleep, we sat across from each other in the living room, the space between us feeling like a chasm. Kay looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring nervously. I just watched her, waiting for her to speak. Finally, she broke the silence. "I'm sorry, Shane," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned back, crossing my arms. "Sorry for what, exactly? For lying? For sneaking around? Or for getting caught?" She winced, and for a moment, I thought she might get defensive, but instead she sighed. "For all of it. For letting it get this far." Her admission hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to feel vindicated, but all I felt was exhaustion. "Why, Kay? Why, Dan? Why not just talk to me?" Her eyes filled with tears as she struggled to find the words. "I don't know, Shane." I felt invisible. Like I was just a mom, just your wife, but never me. And then Dan showed up, and he listened. He made me feel seen again. I stared at her, a bitter laugh escaping before I could stop it. "So you turned to him instead of the person you married? Instead of the father of your kids?" "It wasn't like that," she said quickly, her voice breaking. "It was never supposed to be like that. I didn't plan this. I didn't want this. But it happened," I shot back, my voice rising. "You let it happen. You made a choice, Kay. Don't sit there and act like you're some helpless victim." She wiped at her eyes, her tears falling freely now. I know I messed up. But I swear to you, Shane, it never went beyond. Beyond what?" I demanded. "Beyond kissing? Beyond sneaking off in the middle of the night? Do you really expect me to believe that's all it was?" She hesitated, and that pause said more than any words ever could. I leaned forward, my voice low. "Was it physical?" She shook her head quickly, almost desperately. "No. I swear it wasn't. It was emotional. It was stupid and wrong, but it never got physical." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But after everything, trust felt like an impossible thing to rebuild. "And I'm just supposed to take your word for it?" Her shoulders slumped, and she looked away. "I don't know how to fix this, Shane. I don't know if I can. But I want to try. For us. For the kids." I let out a long breath, my anger giving way to a deep, aching sadness. "Do you even understand what you've done? You didn't just hurt me, Kay. You put cracks in everything we built together. In our family. Our kids might not see it now, but one day they will." She nodded, her tears streaming down her face. "I know. And I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. I'll cut off all contact with Dan, I'll go to therapy, I'll do anything. Please, Shane. Don't give up on us." I looked at her, the woman I had loved for so many years, and I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't untangle. Anger, sadness, betrayal, and somewhere buried deep, a sliver of hope. "I need time," I said finally. "Time to figure out if I can even trust you again. If I can move past this." Kay nodded, her shoulders shaking as she cried. "Take all the time you need," she whispered. "Just, don't shut me out completely. Please." I didn't respond. I didn't know how. Instead, I stood up and walked upstairs to the guest room, leaving her alone in the silence of what we had both broken. The days following that conversation felt like walking through a fog. Kay and I fell into a strange, silent rhythm, coexisting, but never connecting. She tried, though. She made an effort with the kids, cooked elaborate meals, and avoided her phone like it was poison. But it all felt hollow. For me, the trust was gone. Every smile she gave me felt like a question, every kind gesture like an attempt to fix something too broken to repair. I wanted to believe her when she said it hadn't been physical, but the doubt had already rooted itself deep. One night, a week after we got home, Kay knocked softly on the door to the guest room where I'd been sleeping. "Can we talk?" she asked. I nodded, motioning for her to come in. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I've been thinking a lot," she started. "About everything. About us." I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. "I know I hurt you," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I broke something I might never be able to fix. But I don't want to lose you, Shane. I love you. I love our family. And I'll do whatever it takes to prove that to you." Her words were raw, but they didn't have the impact I thought they would. I felt tired, too tired to fight, too tired to forgive. "I believe you mean that," I said finally. "But love isn't enough, Kay. Not anymore. Trust is what holds everything together, and you broke that. I don't know if it can ever be rebuilt." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'll wait," she whispered. "However long it takes. I'll wait for you to believe in us again." I didn't respond. I didn't know if I had it in me to give her the answer she wanted. The weeks turned into months. Kay started therapy on her own, something she said she needed to work through her feelings. I started going to therapy too, trying to sort through my anger and heartbreak. We began couples counseling after a while, but even those sessions felt like walking on eggshells. Slowly, the kids began to notice the cracks in our relationship. Olivia asked me one night if Mom was okay because she cries a lot now. It broke me to see how our choices were affecting them. Eventually, Kay and I sat down again to have the conversation I'd been dreading. "We need to make a decision," I said. "For the kids. For us. We can't keep living like this." She nodded, her face pale but resolute. "Do you think we can fix this?" I looked at her, at the woman I had once loved more than anything, and I realized I didn't have a clear answer. "I don't know," I admitted. In the end, we decided to separate, at least temporarily. I moved into a small apartment nearby so I could still be close to the kids. It wasn't what I had envisioned for our family, but it felt like the only way forward. Kay and I remain civil for the kids' sake, but the wounds are still too fresh for anything more. Whether we'll find our way back to each other or drift further apart, I can't say. All I know is that this betrayal has forever changed the way I see her, and the way I see myself. For now, I'm focusing on the kids and trying to rebuild my life one day at a time. That's it, folks. My story. If you've made it this far, thanks for listening. If you've been through something like this, how did you cope? How did you move forward? I'd love to hear your thoughts.